This is BBC News, the headlines at 10 o'clock. 0.5%. That's the figure the economy shrank. So coming up in the next hour, McCain on the campaign trail. The Republican candidate attacks Barack Obama's tax policies. Good morning. Dramatic new figures just released show that Britain's economy shrank by 0.5% in the last quarter. It's a big fall and worse than expected. The figures for the 3 months up to September confirm that Britain's economic output, or GDP, has fallen for the first time in 18 years.
The new figures mean that we are edging ever closer to a recession. The word has now been used by the Prime Minister and the Governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King. But we won't officially be in recession until the next set of output figures are released at the end of the year. Shares on the London stock market have already taken a tumble in response to today's news. Let's talk to our economics editor, Hugh Pym, who's here. As we were saying, worse than expected.
Yes, down 0.5% was worse than what most of the economists in the city had expected. They thought maybe down 0.2. It will be painful for very many people out there in the economy.
Is there anything that can be done to try to assuage this in any way? Interest rates are perhaps the first thing that spring to mind.
Yes, the Bank of England is well positioned to cut interest rates because it didn't cut them, as you say, it is a world problem, not just a UK problem.
Hugh, more from you later. For now, thank you very much indeed.
And those sharp falls in financial markets as well. We were talking about a moment ago, the FTSE plunged more than 5% on opening. It's still down. In Japan, meanwhile, the Nikkei down almost 10%, its lowest in 5.5 years. Philip Hampshire is at the stock exchange for us with the latest. Philip, what are they doing right now?
Well, we're following those relatively stable, but sentiment is so bad, the market's knocking those lower as well.
Philip, thanks very much. Now, let's talk about housing, because, of course, as Hugh was saying, one of the areas worst affected. And in terms of regions, the southwest particularly badly hit. The increase in home repossessions there around twice the national average. Well, we can talk now to Alex Bushell. He's outside Penzance County Court for us. Alex, just how is the picture?
Well, yes, it's pretty bleak and gloomy down here. I'm outside, as you say, the county court here behind me in Penzance, on the tip of the county of Cornwall, the very edge of the country in the southwest at all.
Alex, thank you.
Well, let's pick up on that. Let's get more on the national figure on housing. Here's Nick Hyam.
Simon, thank you very much. Inflation's up, unemployment's up, but house prices have been falling for some time, and that, of course, is clear evidence of the downturn. Figures from two of our biggest mortgage lenders show that prices...
Ignore the doom and gloom that seems to surround us and maybe treat the kids to a day out, because without those treats, places like this face a very, very difficult future. Back to you in the studio.
Colette Hume, thank you.
As we've been hearing, we're going to take the temperature of the slowdown across the UK. Special day of coverage all day here. You can keep track of main developments as they happen with our live events page online. That's all at the address on your screen. That's all at the address on your screen.
Just after 10:15, these are the headlines. And the economy has shrunk by 0.5%. It's official. We're on the brink.
Stories for you in half an hour's time. I'll see you then.
Sue, thank you very much indeed. Well, it was at 9:30 this morning that we got the official figures, and it's probably fair to say that they were even worse than many economists had predicted. Not since months, another quarter like that, and we will officially be in recession. Well, we're joined now by Paul Lewis, who is the presenter for BBC Radio 4's Money Box programme. Morning, Paul. Thanks for coming in. Is there anything that people can do in this crisis to protect themselves?
Well, I think people are already doing it, and that's one reason the economy has shrunk. They're spending the overall economic problems very hard.
Paul, just to break in for a moment to the thoughts about the effects for all the individuals, we're just hearing from Vienna that OPEC has decided to cut oil output by 1.5 million barrels a day from November the 1st. That's at that emergency meeting they're holding in Vienna. And that, of course, to support the plunging price of oil. Now, the implications of that.
Yes, well, you see, OPEC used to say that it would meet the demand for oil. Whatever we needed, 40% in the last year. A terrifying prospect for people on low and fixed incomes.
Absolutely.
We've got some more breaking news. It's all linked by this sort of thread of gloom. Ryanair, the budget airline, just announced it's closing its base in Valencia in Spain. Loss of 70 weekly flights, 750,000 passengers a year, and 750 jobs in the region. I mean, underlining once again, we're looking at a global problem,
yes,
but anything involved with oil too is also getting particularly badly hit.
And also involved with tourism, because if you look at the detailed figures we've now got from later economy and society we had a few years ago.
We keep hearing this phrase, look, we're talking ourselves into recession. We're getting texts suggesting that we're playing our part here today. But the figures speak for themselves, really, don't they?
Well, they reflect what happened, obviously, between...
Sector of huge unemployment figures that really underlines how deep a recession can be.
It is, and that's the thing that, until a few months ago, people were saying, well, don't worry about how... That's when they start cutting back.
Paul, thanks very much.
OK, OPEC have just announced they're slashing production by 1.5 million barrels of oil a day. Let's get over to Vienna, and the news conference is underway now. Let's join
Tell us what your projections for...
to the global economy fears of a downturn in demand for oil.
So petrol prices coming down for us until we see that playing through. But as we were hearing from Philip down at the stock exchange, because the pound is losing ground against the dollar, it makes it slightly more expensive. So it swings and roundabouts a bit. But anyway, lots more on crunching through all those economic figures and the rest of the fallout to that GDP third quarter announcement, 0.5% contraction.
And worth reiterating that news from Ryanair. It's shutting its base in Valencia, in Spain, a loss of 70 weekly flights. This follows a row, they're saying, with the local council, less to do with the economy than perhaps local issues. But we'll have more from Ryanair on that a little later here on BBC News, where the time is coming up to 9 minutes past 10. And hundreds of thousands of women have won the right to claim a full state pension.
To the full state pension by 2025. Jane Francis Kelly, BBC News.
Now back to those GDP figures, because we're just getting a quick comment through from the Shadow Chancellor George Osborne saying everyone expected a bad figure. This is much worse, saying millions of British families are in for a very difficult time in the months ahead, a defining moment in the record of Gordon Brown, the day that we can all see the central claims he made over 10 years that he'd abolished boom and bust and therefore didn't need to set aside money for a rainy day have been shown to be completely false. We'll be hearing from the Conservatives and indeed from the Chancellor shortly.
That's still to come. Now look at the weather. Here's Philip Avery.
Hello there. Friday will turn out to be a really decent day across many parts of the British Isles this morning.
Summary at 10:33, but if you're away from the television, you want to keep up to date, we're live on the web now, bbc.co.uk/news. Click on the link there.
Let's get more now on the economic downturn. On the news, the economy shrank by 0.5% in the last quarter. The downturn is being felt across a huge range of industries, including tourism.
About what they're doing to try to beat the credit crunch. But for now, back to you in the studio.
Colette, thank you.
So, first contraction in 16 years. What does the Chancellor have to say about it? Alistair Darling, talk to Niels Blythe.
It's been obvious for some time that the combined effect of the...
Chancellor Alistair Darling talking to Niels Blythe about the latest figures on GDP, which show the first shrinkage of the UK economy and, of course, would seem to indicate that we are on the brink of recession.
And that, of course, is our top headline this morning at 40 minutes to 11. The economy has shrunk by 0.5%, and it is now official. We're on the brink.
OK, well, let's find out what's happening on the London Stock Exchange. Philip Hampshire is there for us this morning. What's the reaction been?
Well, Simon, it's been overwhelmingly negative. Overnight last night we had concerns over in Asia.
That you don't achieve very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Andrew Lillico there.
Well, let's now get the view from Geoffrey Dix, who's Chief Economist for RBS Global Banking and Markets. I don't know if you could hear Mr. Lillico there, but he's talking about these figures just been warming up, that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
12 months will be very difficult.
And in the short term, do you see a vicious spiral on the markets, then the city underestimating what we now see to be the scale of the problem?
Well, I think we've all been taken by surprise, particularly stock market down nearly 10%. Recession faces us all.
And Andrew Lillico there talking about a time for aggressive interest rate cuts from the Bank of England. Would you echo that?
Yes, of course. We've had 50 basis points in a can cut interest rates in a way that we couldn't do then, and we will do.
Geoffrey Dix, thank you for that.
Well, as we've heard, we're taking the temperature of the economic slowdown across the UK in a special day of coverage here on BBC News. You can keep track of all the main developments as they happen with our live event page.
And therefore, we need to be able to provide them with what they wish.
OK, Rob Hayward from the British Beer and Pub Association, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And back to the grim economic situation. Many of you have been contacting the BBC to explain how the downturn's affecting you. So let's hear some of your stories this morning.
I'm John Moylan, BBC News.
For this economic downturn.
Well, a lot of you getting in touch with us as well, texting on 61124. What does Mr. Darling mean when he says we'll get through it? People are already paying dearly for this mayhem, and many more will. He'll get through it, but not all of us will. That's from Glyn Jones in Cambridgeshire.
Anne in Newcastle thinks the Queen should step in at this point. She said she's sitting with billions in the bank while her country and her people are going bankrupt. It's about time she put her hand in her pocket to help her country and people.
61124, do keep in touch with us. Full coverage, of course, of the downturn throughout the day here on BBC News, where it's now time for the weather, and it's Alex Deakin. Good morning.
Good morning, Simon. It was a bit of a grey and damp start, but...
Thank you.
So 0.5%, worse than expected, and a real recession in prospect. Let's turn to Philip Hampshire at the London Stock Exchange, find out what the markets are making of this. They're all going down, Philip.
They are headed.
Today we were talking about how a lower pound should, in the end, help exporters. But, you know, if the world markets are as gloomy as they appear to be too, then nobody's buying, I suppose. So hard to see who benefits.
Well, there's a balance between two separate factors here, as you have the pound.
I mean, we talk about inflation proofing, and you say inflation potentially coming down despite the effect of the expensive dollar. But what about recession proofing? I mean, if everything is on the way down, is there anything that people can do in terms of the corporate world or the investors to actually put their money in a safe place?
It depends. It depends, obviously, on what's over here in Europe.
Philip, thank you.
Just to put some flesh on these figures that we're getting, there's a breakdown. The ONS, Office for National Statistics, have broken down some of these GDP figures. The manufacturing sector, which accounts for around 14% of gross domestic product, is, according to these figures, now in recession. Manufacturing output decreased by 1% in the 3 months to the end of September. That comes after a 0.9% decline the previous quarter. It's also looking at the services sector, of course, tourism, a big factor in the United Kingdom. 3/4 of the UK economy, in fact, that fell into negative territory as well. That's down 0.4% from growth of 0.2%. That was in the second quarter. Now, that's the biggest drop in the services sector for 18 years. And just to talk about construction output, we were talking to Paul Durst about that a little earlier. That's added to the GDP slide into negative territory. That's down 0.8% in the quarter, which stood at 0.5% the previous quarter. Of course, as Paul was saying, these figures are often revised by the Office for National Statistics. They did, in fact, revise the figure for April to June. That was revised down in August from an earlier reading of a 0.2% growth and was then revised to a figure of 0% growth, so a standstill. And now, as we've been reporting this morning in the last few minutes, the news that it's down 0.5%, much greater than many of the predictions.
So pending revisions, a pretty grim picture, and throughout the day we're hearing your views about how this downturn's affecting you from correspondents around the country. Colette Hume is at the National Show Caves Centre for Wales, north of Swansea. And so, Colette, you were telling us that the effort then is to imagine other ways of making some revenue back, like weddings in those caves.
Absolutely. Here in this cave, you can get yourself married. Just a little way up behind me.